I was fired for a mistake I didn't make, just so the boss's brother wouldn't have to take the fall. I followed every procedure, double-checked every turbine blade. I even cleaned the machine more carefully than anyone else ever had. But the one night I wasn't there, something went wrong, and somehow, it became my fault. They chose nepotism over truth and threw me out. But it didn't start that way. The first time I saw the CMM X900, someone had taped a handwritten sign above the control panel: "Handle with more care than your marriage." I chuckled. But when I ran my fingers along the polished edge of the machine's granite track, I stopped smiling. This wasn't just any piece of equipment. It hummed with precision, like it knew it was the most important thing in the room. On my first morning at Vortex Engineering, the head of quality control barely glanced up when handing me my badge. "You're the new blade measurer? Good. You'll be shadowing Antonio. Try not to slow him down." Antonio looked like a man who hadn't taken a vacation in 20 years, and liked it that way. Thick glasses, oil-stained hands, no time for small talk. But he eyed me differently when I didn't flinch at the complexity of the machine or the stack of old blueprints on his desk. "I don't need someone who can push buttons," he muttered. "I need someone who listens when the machine speaks." I listened, every day for weeks, and slowly. He started to teach. No one else on site knew how to fully maintain the X900, not even the engineers. That made Antonio a rare breed. And now, strangely, he was choosing me. By week 3, he handed me the calibration file with a quiet nod. That was the closest thing to a compliment I'd get. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had something to prove. Years ago, my father, a turbine technician, lost his job for calling out a safety flaw in a pressure system. They said he was not a team player. We lived on canned beans for months. He died of a stroke at 54, and never set foot in a plant again. At his funeral, I made him a promise, one I never spoke aloud until I met the X900. I'll do it right. I'll never let them break me for telling the truth. Standing in front of that machine felt like I was finally where I was supposed to be. Every turbine blade that passed through its brackets reminded me of who I was and who I refused to become. But I didn't know then that this machine, the one I was learning to protect, would soon become the reason they'd try to destroy me. It started as a minor inconvenience. Every morning, I'd arrive just before 6 o'clock, tie my hair up, slide on my safety glasses, and head straight to the CMM X900. And almost every morning, I'd find the same thing. The measurement cycle from the night before had been left unfinished. 1 or 2 turbine blades, sometimes 3, still sitting untouched, resting in their trays like a task half forgotten or ignored. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe the night shift ran into a machine delay. Maybe there was a software glitch. Maybe someone got called away for an emergency. After all, things happened. But when it kept happening, 4 days in a row, then 6, I started tracking it. Same pattern, same lazy trail of half-effort, and always the same name on the operator log: Ivan Grigorev. The first time I saw him, he came in late, coffee in hand, hoodie half-zipped, acting like the shop floor was his living room, while I wiped down the machine and recalibrated the rail. He'd lean against the rack with that lopsided smirk like he owned the place. He rarely looked me in the eye. One afternoon, I caught him right before shift change and asked, politely, why the previous order hadn't been sorted. The rotary blades were jumbled, out of sequence, making it harder to track which ones had been measured. It was a simple question, but he snorted like I'd accused him of murder. "Not my job," he shrugged. "You want 'em sorted, sort 'em yourself." I blinked. "But it's standard procedure. Unsorted blades can corrupt batch data, you know that." He turned away mid-sentence. "I don't talk about that stuff." Didn't talk about it? That was a first. I brought it up with Boris, our team lead. under the guise of a clarification. Just confirming, we're still required to sort incoming blades numerically, right? It was a soft approach. No accusation, just fact. The next morning, I was called into a team discussion with Boris, Ivan, and my direct supervisor. It was more of a performance than a meeting. Boris opened with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Just a little miscommunication, he said smoothly. Everyone's doing their best. Ivan slouched in his seat, arms crossed like a sulking teenager. I kept my face still, words calm. I just want to make sure we're following protocol. Boris's tone sharpened slightly. Let's not nitpick. Teamwork is more important than rules sometimes. That's when it clicked. Ivan wasn't just any operator. He was Boris's younger brother. And Boris? He had a direct line to Freddie, the department director, the man in the crisp suit who only came down to the floor when someone higher up was watching. From that day on, everything I did near Ivan was met with passive resistance, missed steps, incomplete reports, and once, a tool I'd left in the calibration drawer mysteriously went missing. I said nothing, but the discomfort sank in deeper each shift. It wasn't about sorting blades anymore. It was about something else, a game I hadn't realized I was playing. And somehow, I was already losing points for simply doing things right. Still, I kept my head down and my records tight. If they were going to play games, I was going to keep score. The first thing I noticed that morning was the sound. It wasn't loud, more like a dull, metallic scrape, barely audible beneath the usual whir of the fans and hum of the computer's startup cycle. But the CMM X900 wasn't supposed to make any sound when moving. Its head glided on an air-cushioned rail system so smooth it was nearly silent. That was the whole point. A scratch meant vibration. Vibration meant error. And error meant scrapping a turbine blade worth $20,000. I froze. My hand hovered above the manual control. The probe arm was gliding across the stone rail toward the far end of the machine, beginning its calibration warm-up. I immediately hit the kill switch. The probe stopped mid-motion. The air pump shut off. The room fell into a sudden, eerie quiet. I walked around the platform, crouched down, and squinted at the granite track. That's when I saw it, a deep, uneven gouge about 2 inches long and nearly a 1/4 inch wide, like someone had dropped a metal object corner first onto the measuring rail. I ran my finger gently along the edge and felt my stomach drop. The air cushion mechanism would have lost pressure instantly over a gouge like that, if the probe had scraped across it at full speed. The resulting impact could have shattered the stylus or thrown off every measurement for weeks. It looked fresh. I took a photo, time-stamped it, and sent it to Vladimir, our on-call facility tech. Then I messaged Boris and copied my supervisor. I didn't bother waiting for approval. I powered the machine fully down and hung a red "Do Not Use" tag from the bracket mount. As I cleaned up and waited for someone to respond, I checked the log from the night shift. Sure enough, the last operator was Ivan. Again. And sure enough, the final entry in the machine system showed no error reports, no emergency shutdowns, no interruptions. Either the system hadn't detected the issue, or someone had ignored it. Vladimir arrived 20 minutes later. He's the kind of man who doesn't say much, but you can always tell what he's thinking by the way his mouth tenses. He crouched next to the gouge, ran his hand along it the same way I had, and just muttered. Someone dropped something heavy. I looked at him. Can it be repaired? He sighed. We'll have to remove the entire rail, send it to Dresden, and the arm likely needs recalibration too. How long? 3, 4 weeks minimum? 3 to 4 weeks. The backlog would be catastrophic. Every department downstream relied on us for clearance before they could begin rework. That meant parts sitting idle, orders delayed, and penalties stacking up. By the time Boris finally arrived, 20 minutes after Vladimir, I was sitting with my laptop open. compiling a full incident report with photo documentation and log timestamps. He looked annoyed, not concerned. "What's this about damage?" he asked, as if he hadn't read a single message. I pointed to the gouge. "Found it during startup. Machine was producing a grinding sound." Boris bent over briefly, then straightened up, arms crossed. "Looks like an accident." "Ivan ran the last shift," I said flatly, "and there's no report of any issue." He raised a brow. "Well, did you see him drop anything?" I blinked. "No, but the timing—" "Then it's speculation." He cut in quickly. "Could have been you. Could have been earlier damage that just finally gave out." My jaw clenched. The system was fully recalibrated 5 days ago, and this wasn't here yesterday. He ignored that. "Freddy doesn't want panic. Let's keep this quiet until we get a technician statement." As if on cue, Vladimir stood up and brushed his hands off. "Machine needs to be pulled from service immediately. This surface damage is critical." Boris's smile tightened. "We'll take it under advisement." I looked from him to Vladimir, then back to the dark gouge in the granite. My worry was gone now, replaced with something colder, sharper, anger. It wasn't just the damage, it was the denial. They weren't going to fix the problem. They were going to bury it. And if I wasn't careful, I knew exactly where they'd bury me. I had the resignation letter written. It sat on my desktop in a folder titled simply Exit. No signature yet, no timestamp. But the words were all there, calm, professional, airtight. I'd even listed the dates of the incidents, attached photos, copied logs, everything lined up. The document was ready, and honestly, so was I. The CMM X900 had been down for 9 days, and counting. The stone rail was en route to Dresden, the probe arm in its case waiting for recalibration. Without it, my position was suspended. They temporarily reassigned me to pre-assessment, the intake department where parts first arrived for visual and manual inspection before moving to the measuring room. Compared to what I'd been doing, it was painfully basic work. Sorting blades by serial number, logging scratches, taking surface photos. I went from operating the most advanced equipment on site to checking boxes on clipboards. And I might have tolerated that if it weren't for the way Boris looked straight through me whenever I passed. As if I were already gone. As if he'd won. That's what gnawed at me the most. I'd spent months doing everything right. Early shifts, clean data, flawless reports. And when something went wrong, I didn't point fingers. I brought proof. I showed up. I spoke clearly. And somehow, I was still the problem. The one who was too stiff. Too serious. Too exacting. Meanwhile, Ivan strutted past with his untucked shirt and lazy grin, still scheduled for every night shift, still untouched. I stared at the unsigned resignation letter more times than I could count. But every time my finger hovered over print, my mind drifted back to Antonio. He hadn't just trained me, he'd chosen me. He could have checked out months ago and just coasted to retirement. But he didn't. He stayed late with me on cold winter mornings, showing me how the machine thinks, how 1/10 of a millimeter could mean the difference between pass and catastrophic failure. He treated that machine like it was alive, like it was a legacy. And I remembered what he told me the last time we spoke, right before he went on leave. This machine doesn't need talent. It needs someone who gives a damn, someone who won't let the clowns wreck it just because they're louder. I could still hear his voice, gruff, tired, but steady. That was the promise I hadn't put into words, but it was there. The one I'd made to my father years ago. The one I'd made again silently when Antonio handed me the calibration files without saying a word. So I didn't hit print. I closed the folder, instead. I did what no one expected. I stayed. And I watched. The pre-assessment department, ironically, gave me something I hadn't had before: visibility. I started seeing the full picture. How orders flowed in from global clients. how blades got tracked across the shop, how missing data or late measurements delayed an entire turbine build. I saw how little friction it took to slow the whole thing down. I also met Marta, a quiet, sharp-witted HR coordinator who ran the compliance logs. We crossed paths by accident. She was tracking a missing shipment tag and asked if I'd seen it on the intake table. I hadn't, but I helped her look anyway. She seemed surprised. "You're Ember, right?" she asked when we finally found it. "Depends who's asking," she smiled. "The one who shut down the measuring room without permission? I followed protocol." "Exactly," she said. "That's rare around here." Over the next few days, we fell into the habit of chatting briefly during shift overlaps. She didn't like Boris either, said his hands-off style conveniently turned into blame down when things went sideways. She knew about Ivan, and though she never said it outright, I could tell she was watching too. So while the machine was gone, I built something else, a record, a network, a foundation. I wasn't sure how long I'd stay, but I knew this much. If they were going to push me out, I wouldn't go quietly. And if they thought I'd just roll over like everyone else, they'd never really seen what I was capable of. When the CMM X900 finally came back online, I was the first to touch its interface. The granite rail returned with a pristine polish. The new air cushion system gliding so smoothly, it felt almost wrong to breathe near it. Vladimir handled the recalibration himself this time, walking me through every checkpoint. We were already operating on a skeleton crew, and without Antonio around, I was the only person left on site who could run the full setup without notes. Production had been waiting like vultures. 4 departments were starving for measurements. Blades sat in holding carts for weeks, the day we powered the machine back on. I worked a 12-hour shift just to clear the first wave of backlog. The next morning, I came in early again, expecting to pick up where I left off, but I paused when I opened the output folder. There were 2 blades left unmeasured from the previous order. Again. The timestamp on the last report was 10:30 p.m., Ivan's shift. Of course. I exhaled slowly, clicking through the report log. Something wasn't adding up. The average cycle time for each blade, measurement and replacement, was around 4 minutes. Ivan's log, however, had gaps of 15 minutes, 27, even 32 between cycles. Yet, there were no error flags, no pause reports, no recorded restarts. That didn't make sense. Even with minor hiccups, sensor recalibrations, manual recentering, those pauses should have triggered at least one warning or notification. The machine documented everything, unless someone had paused the cycle manually, bypassed it, or walked away entirely. The worst part? There was no proof of anything, not yet. I caught Ivan just before he left his next shift. He looked half asleep, hoodie up, sipping from a dented thermos. "I noticed some large gaps in the logs from last night," I said casually. He blinked. "What?" "The measurement logs, blades 23 to 26, took almost an hour." He stared at me like I'd asked him about quantum physics. "Machine froze up," he mumbled. "There's no freeze report." He shrugged. "Bored. Guess it didn't log it." I paused. "So, it froze, but didn't notify you, didn't restart, and then just fixed itself?" Another shrug. "I don't know. It worked eventually. What's the problem?" I didn't answer. I just walked away. That afternoon, I started a new file, a hidden folder on a separate drive, password protected, time-stamped. I began logging every measurable irregularity, log gaps, missing reports, odd calibrations, machine reboots without reason. Every Ivan shift got its own subfolder. I also started saving off-site backups. Our company allowed for secure work access via internal cloud servers. No rule against copying operational data for continuity. I made sure my copies were clean, labeled, and hidden well within my assigned folders. Nothing was technically secret, but it wouldn't be easy to stumble across either. I didn't report anything, not yet. Not until I was sure. But the feeling was growing. It wasn't just negligence anymore. It was something worse: intentional apathy, a pattern, an expectation that no one would call it out, that no one could. Ivan walked around like he'd been given immunity, and maybe, in a way, he had. That week, I worked early shifts while he worked nights. The rhythm should have been seamless, one order handed off to the next. But instead, I was constantly picking up unfinished jobs, re-verifying dimensions, correcting metadata he forgot to update. One morning, I found an entire order where he'd reversed the serial number and part ID columns. The measurement values were fine, but they were matched to the wrong blades. If I hadn't caught it, a turbine could have been assembled with a mismatch set, off by half a degree, enough to cause vibration at high RPMs, enough to fail. I fixed it without a word. But my suspicion hardened. He didn't just not care. He knew someone else would cover for him, and he assumed that someone would always be me. But I wasn't covering anymore. I was documenting. Because when the walls finally cracked, I wasn't going to knock on doors or file complaints. I was going to have evidence. And this time, I'd be ready. Monday morning started like any other, at least, for the first 5 minutes. I swiped into the building at 5:52 a.m. Same as always, the measuring room was still cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing in that familiar uneven rhythm. I booted up the CMM X900, ran the pre-start diagnostics, and waited for the system to cycle through its green lights. I'd been off Saturday and Sunday, my first full weekend in nearly a month. Management had pushed hard to run overtime shifts while the backlog was still brutal, and Yvonne had volunteered to cover both days. Not surprising. Night shifts paid a premium, and no one double-checked his work anyway. But as I opened the measurement folder, expecting to see 4 completed orders waiting to be compiled, I froze. There was nothing. No .ext reports, no PDFs, no Excel exports, just an empty folder, like no one had ever touched the machine. That couldn't be right. I opened the log tracker. The machine had been turned on continuously since Saturday at 4 p.m. No shutdowns, no errors, no reboot logs. The calibration file had been loaded multiple times. The blade model had been run. The system had recorded over 63 full measuring cycles across 2.5 days, but none of it had been saved. I stood completely still, staring at the screen. The cursor blinked at me like it was waiting for an explanation. My mouth went dry. I clicked into the raw interface, digging deeper. There were session records, brief flashes of each blade ID, start times, durations. But the data output line was blank, no entries, no post-processing, no compiled report folders. It was as if the machine had done all the work and then forgotten everything. Panic crept in slowly. 1 inch at a time, 4 full orders, each worth thousands. Some of those parts were likely already in the repair queue, being cut, welded, rebalanced, based on nothing. If one of those blades was out of tolerance, it could throw off the entire assembly. I picked up the phone and called Vladimir directly. No middleman this time. He answered groggily. You find another crack? No, worse, I said. We ran 4 orders this weekend. The machine processed them all, but none of the reports were saved. Silence. Then, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I turned off the machine, not just paused it, but fully powered it down. Then, I locked the tool drawer and posted a bright red placard on the screen. Do not use. Technician called. Vladimir arrived just after 6:30, still zipping up his coat. I walked him through what I found, step by step. He tapped through the back end, confirming every horrifying detail. Then he stopped on a screen I hadn't thought to check. System preferences. He scrolled down and paused. The export function's been toggled off. he said flatly. I leaned in. What? He pointed. Right here. This controls whether the measurement data gets stored locally or discarded after each cycle. It's set to discard. That's not default, I whispered. No, it's manual. Someone disabled it. My brain tried to find another explanation. Maybe a system reset? Maybe an accidental click? But no one accessed those settings without knowing the exact password and sequence, and only 3 people knew how to find that menu at all. Me, Vladimir, and Ivan. The silence between us felt like a thunderclap. I finally asked, "Is there any way this happened by mistake?" He didn't even look at me. No. I stood there, stunned, completely still. The room felt smaller. My skin itched. 4 orders gone. 4 turbine builds compromised. And no one would have noticed. Not for weeks. Maybe months. Until a vibration error showed up in a test cell, or a client reported early degradation in the field. Vladimir sat down, rubbing his temples. We'll need to remeasure everything. Production's going to lose their minds. I'll start sorting the blades, I said. Already moving. Later that morning, I informed Boris and sent a full incident report to Freddie. No reply. No callback. Just silence. And I knew exactly what that silence meant. They were hoping I'd drop it. But this time, I wouldn't. The moment Freddie walked into the measuring room, I knew something was wrong. He never came down here. Not unless someone above him was watching, or someone beneath him needed putting in their place. But this time, it wasn't about optics. It was personal. He entered like he owned the air in the room, suit pressed, tie too tight, the kind of expensive cologne that made the concrete smell pretentious. I was finishing up the remeasurement reports for the 4 corrupted orders, every blade sorted and triple-checked by hand. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how things were going, just stopped at the end of my workbench, placed a sealed envelope in front of me, and smiled. A cold, managerial smile, the kind people give right before they fire you and offer you a bottle of water. I'm here to offer you a choice, he said lightly, like this was a friendly lunch conversation. Inside is a signed termination letter, effective immediately. I didn't touch it. You can, of course, choose not to accept it, he went on, but that would require some reflection and an apology. I kept my eyes on his. An apology to whom? Ivan, he said, almost with a shrug. This ongoing hostility you've shown, accusations, constant complaints, reports with an unmistakably accusatory tone, it's become a workplace issue. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I stayed silent. Freddie sighed, still smiling. Look, you're good at what you do. No one's denying that. But teams require chemistry, balance, respect. We don't want to lose you, but we can't keep letting this friction disrupt the department. He paused, as if expecting me to break into tears or protest. I didn't. I waited. He softened his tone. So, you can write up a brief acknowledgement, a statement that maybe you misinterpreted some things, that you value your colleagues, and that moving forward, you'll work to restore trust. And of course, an apology to Ivan. He tapped the envelope. Or you sign that. The silence between us was like a closed door. In the corner of my vision, I saw Boris standing outside the room, arms crossed, pretending to scroll his phone. Lena, the logistics lead, passed by the window but didn't look in. And Mateo, from tool calibration, he made eye contact with me for half a second, then turned and walked the other way. No one was coming in. No one was standing beside me. They weren't even hiding it. I was already out, and Freddie just came to collect the body. I slowly reached out and took the envelope. I didn't open it, just turned it over, feeling the seal between my fingers. I'm expected to deliver your written apology by 2 o'clock, Freddie said cheerfully. After that, I'll consider this matter closed. He turned to leave, satisfied, but just before stepping out, he stopped and looked back. "We really do hope you'll make the right choice. Ember, this team needs you, but not if you can't be part of it." Then he left. I stood there for a long time, staring at the sealed envelope in my hand. My face didn't change. My breath stayed steady. But inside, everything twisted. Not because I was shocked, because I wasn't. They didn't care about the data I'd saved, the backlogs I'd caught, the parts I'd kept from failing. They cared about silence, about obedience, about not making their jobs uncomfortable. And I had broken that rule. I had reported the truth. And in return, I was the problem. For the first time, I felt truly alone. But I didn't crumple. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing everything: folders, logs, backup files. I knew the rules. I knew what equipment had to be returned, what files had to be saved, what logs had to be submitted. Because if they wanted to play this game, I'd play it right. But I'd play it on my terms. And they had no idea who they'd just handed that envelope to. By 12:45 p.m., I had made my decision, not with emotion, not with rage, just clarity. Cold, surgical clarity. Freddie wanted me gone? Fine. But I'd make sure I walked out in compliance with every rule this company ever wrote, because that's the kind of employee I'd always been. That's what made this so poetic. I began with my laptop. Per company policy, all personal files had to be removed from company hardware before separation. I deleted every non-essential file: meeting notes, drafts, annotated PDFs, screenshots from internal systems. Then I compiled a final backup: all operational data, measurement reports, calibration files, and logs from my last 4 months. Compressed, labeled properly, time-stamped. The system required that this archive be uploaded to the shared team drive. But what the system didn't say was where. I navigated to the raw directory structure of the drive, about a dozen nested folders deep, beneath archived equipment manuals and outdated firmware builds, and created a new folder titled Z Post Proc Aux Rev A19. Unless someone knew exactly what they were looking for, it would never appear in a standard search. All legal, all compliant, all invisible. Next, I scrubbed the machine interface. The CMM X900 kept a local cache of recent calibrations and custom scripts. I exported them, filed them, and reset the display to factory view. The machine would still run, of course, but without its tailored shortcuts, user macros, and personalized measurement sets. It would be like giving a high-performance sports car to someone who couldn't drive stick. I then logged off the system one final time and ran a full wipe of my login profile, including stored passwords, session history, and presets. Then I turned to the physical gear: company phone, factory reset, badge deactivated, notebook returned with a list of completed handoffs, safety gear left on my chair, minus the steel toe boots and impact-rated glasses, which, per paragraph 14b of the termination protocol, were considered personal property once issued. By 1:30, I was standing at the security gate. The guards were surprised when I requested a full exit inspection. Standard for involuntary terminations, I reminded them calmly. And I'd like written confirmation. They hesitated. No one ever asked for this. But they complied. Backpack opened, pockets turned out, shoes off. I stood still as they documented everything. When it was over, I signed their form and took a photo of the signed copy, just in case, as I stepped outside. The winter air hit me full in the face, crisp, sharp, clear. I didn't look back, but I heard the buzz of the double doors opening behind me. It was Freddie. "Ember!" he called. I paused, turned slowly. He jogged the last few steps, envelope in hand. His face was flushed, but his voice strained to sound cheerful. "Hey, listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I said nothing. "I mean, We never wanted to lose you. This just got out of hand. I'm sure if we sit down, talk it through, maybe just walk back that apology, I can fix this." I met his eyes. Cool. Flat. "You gave me a signed termination letter," I said. "Effective immediately." "Well, yes. But that doesn't mean—" "It does. By company policy, the moment I signed it, my access ends. My responsibility is limited to returning all equipment and data in accordance with protocol, which I've done." His mouth opened, then shut. "I've completed my handoff," I added. Per Section 9E, I'm not authorized to perform any further task or access restricted systems without written HR clearance. "But the machine is operational," I said, "just not customized. You'll need someone with system-level knowledge to rebuild those presets." He blinked. "You deleted the files?" "No," I said evenly. "I followed procedure. Everything's stored on the shared server." He exhaled in relief. "You'll just have to know where to look." Then I turned, walked down the concrete path toward the street. One foot after another, measured, controlled. The silence I left behind was louder than any outburst, and the chaos it would cause hadn't even started yet. By Thursday morning, it started. The first missed call came at 8:07 a.m. "No caller ID." I didn't answer. A second call came 15 minutes later, then a third. That one left a voicemail. But I didn't bother listening, not yet. I knew who it was. I had spent the last 3 days adjusting to silence, and it felt good. No machines, no concrete floors, no fluorescent buzz. Just real air. My new apartment overlooked a quiet park where joggers passed with dogs on leashes and nobody wore steel-toed boots. I'd made a habit of taking my coffee on the balcony. This morning was no different, except for the grin I couldn't quite suppress. They were cracking. I'd heard whispers already. A friend from the calibration lab texted me Tuesday. "No one can get the X900 to run. People are freaking out. Vlad is everywhere." By Wednesday afternoon, a former coworker from inventory sent me a photo. 6 carts of turbine blades, all marked on hold, lined up outside the measuring room door. No one inside. Apparently. Even tried to run a batch himself. Rumor was, he crashed the probe into the bracket mount and called it a software bug. He didn't even know how to recalibrate the arm. Vladimir had stopped answering his calls by Wednesday night, so now, they were calling me. The fourth call came around 9:15. I finally picked up. I didn't say hello. I let them speak first. "Ember?" Freddie's voice was strained, too high, too polite. "Listen, I know things got tense, but I think we all overreacted. What happened last week? It wasn't personal. There's a lot of pressure on us right now. Things slip." I said nothing. "We're in a difficult spot, honestly. We could really use your help getting the machine stable again, just temporarily, as a consultant. Maybe. Same schedule, same setup." I sipped my coffee. "Double your previous rate," he added quickly. "You'd be back by Monday." That was cute. "No," I said. "Triple," Freddie stammered. "Triple? Ember? That's—" "And a written apology," I continued calmly. "From you, on company letterhead, acknowledging that I was terminated without cause and that I acted in full compliance with all protocols." He went quiet. I leaned back in the chair. "And one more thing, I don't work with Ivan, not ever." Freddie exhaled into the line. "Ember. Come on, that's not realistic." "No," I said. "What's not realistic is expecting me to clean up the mess you made. For the same people who blamed me for everything I did right." "Look," he snapped, losing the polished tone. "We don't need you. We're just trying to offer a path back in. Be reasonable." I let the silence stretch. Then I said it. Quiet, sharp, and final. "Don't call again unless you're ready to meet my terms." Then I hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, Then opened my settings and blocked the number. I blocked Boris too, just in case. Then I exhaled, slow, steady, no yelling, no triumph speech, just satisfaction. Cool, clean satisfaction. They'd expected me to beg, to bend, to show up quietly like a dog they tossed out and suddenly remembered. But I wasn't theirs anymore. And now, they were learning, far too late, that losing me wasn't just inconvenient. It was operational paralysis. I closed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. I had a job interview downtown at 11:30. A smaller firm, closer to home, no corporate hierarchy, just engineers who cared about the work. I didn't know yet if I'd take it, but I knew one thing. I'd never walk back into Vortex on anyone's terms but mine. It was Marta who told me. I hadn't heard from her since I left Vortex. We weren't exactly close, just two people who happened to share quiet truths in passing. But when her name popped up in my inbox, I opened the message without hesitation. Subject: You're in the report. The body was short. Officially, you were terminated due to interpersonal conflict. Unofficially, you're now the case study for everything wrong with how this company handles technical leadership. HR wrote a full report. I thought you'd want to know. I read it 3 times. Then, once more. Slower. She attached a redacted copy of the internal audit findings, 42 pages, titled, Failure to Protect Critical Skill Assets, an Internal Review of Quality Division Mismanagement. Page 17 started with my name. The termination of Ember Calloway, the site's sole certified CMM X900 technician at the time of dismissal, resulted in a 28-day operational outage, an $840,000 backlog, and 4 high-value client delays. Documentation from Ms. Calloway, despite her abrupt removal, was organized, properly archived, and fully compliant with protocol. In contrast, managerial oversight displayed repeated failures to address process lapses, data irregularities, and personnel conflict, particularly in relation to Mr. Ivan Grigorev and his supervisor, Mr. Boris Lukhanov. I scrolled through the rest in stunned silence. They hadn't buried it. They'd built a paper monument on top of it. By the time I reached the final pages, I was almost smiling. Freddie's name was in the conclusion, lack of judgment. Disciplinary recommendation, pending review by corporate ethics. And Ivan? Fired. No fanfare, no reassignment, just quietly removed 2 days after the report was finalized. Boris didn't last much longer. One HR note said his handling of the situation demonstrated favoritism and poor documentation standards, which was corporate speak for, you lied, and we caught you. The following Monday, I got an official email from corporate. We are conducting a follow-up investigation and would appreciate your voluntary participation. You were listed as a primary witness. I replied with a single sentence. I'll make myself available. That Thursday, I walked back into the building, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, but as someone they couldn't ignore. The HR conference room felt unfamiliar now. Cleaned up, quiet, professional. A man I didn't know introduced himself as Jonathan Reeves, Internal Compliance Officer from North America. He asked if I had anything prepared. I did. A printed packet, backed by timestamps, screenshots, and technician logs. I walked him through every event, from the mislabeling incidents to the erased reports. I explained the machine configuration, the shortcuts I'd created, and how disabling the output function had no business happening by accident. He barely blinked. At the end, he closed his folder and said, "You were very clear, very measured." I nodded. I always was. That was the problem. He cracked a small smile. Not anymore. As I left the room, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt steady, whole, in control again. They'd tried to erase me, but I'd left the kind of truth behind that refused to disappear. And now, even without setting foot on that production floor again, I had power, not revenge, something better, credibility, and that was something no one could take from me again. It started with silence. Not mine this time, but the kind that descends when powerful people realize they're no longer protected. 2 weeks after I gave my formal statement, the audit team from the U.S. headquarters arrived at Vortex Engineering. No announcement, no grand entrance, just a black car at the front gate, a list of names, and security escorts to conference rooms no one ever used. They weren't from human resources. They were from compliance, legal, and risk management. The kind of people whose job descriptions began with internal counsel and ended with criminal liability. By the end of day 1, they had seized hard drives. By day 3, they'd already paused 4 major supplier contracts. By Friday, half the management team was in mandatory closed-door interviews. And Freddie? Freddie stopped smiling. My source, Marta, always quietly watching, told me the turning point was a cross-check between internal project timelines and external client billing. Someone had backdated approval logs. Someone had marked turbine components as past QA that had never been measured at all. The data trails led back to Freddie's credentials. Worse, they discovered he'd edited timestamps, manually overriding file history to make it appear as if some of Ivan's orders had been double-checked when they hadn't even been touched. The modifications were subtle, but not subtle enough. Vladimir confirmed the files had been altered, and once that piece clicked into place, the entire tower of mismanagement came crashing down. Freddie didn't go quietly when they called him in for a final review. He reportedly raised his voice so loud it echoed through the hallway, claimed he was being scapegoated, that this whole mess started with some technician trying to act like a boss. Funny, I was never a boss. But apparently, I'd caused enough damage by telling the truth that it ruined one. The following Monday, Freddie was formally terminated, not just from Vortex, but from the parent corporation. His access was cut, his badge flagged, and then came the part no one expected. He was extradited. Turns out, one of the clients affected by the falsified QA records was a U.S. Department of Energy partner, a turbine installed in an active power grid with government oversight. Falsifying compliance data on a federal contract? That wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Freddie was flown back to the States under investigation for fraud, data manipulation, and endangering regulated infrastructure. He didn't even have time to clean out his office. The shock was seismic. Vortex fell into complete chaos. Orders were frozen. Clients demanded external inspections. Several suppliers backed out of upcoming bids. Internally, everyone spoke in hushed tones. But one name kept coming up. Mine. I wasn't there. I hadn't set foot on the production floor in weeks. But my name moved through the building like a ghost, spoken cautiously, sometimes bitterly, often respectfully. Calloway was right. She warned them. She backed everything up. No gloating, no need. Justice didn't need a loud voice. It just needed proof and time. And now that it had both, it came down like a blade. I wasn't celebrated. No awards, no corporate apology press release. But I didn't want that. I didn't need it. What I got was better. The same management that once dismissed me now referenced my process logs during retraining. My folder structure, the one buried 12 layers deep, became the new standard. Quietly, the systems I'd built were restored and replicated. And Freddie? Well, he became the cautionary tale. Proof that silencing the right voice doesn't make the truth disappear. It just delays the reckoning. And when it comes, it doesn't knock. It walks straight in with a badge, a warrant, and a name that no one can forget. 9 months. That's how long it had been since I walked out of Vortex Engineering for the last time. Boots clean, head held high, silence ringing louder than any final word. In that time, I didn't just find a new job. I found a life that fit. A small company near home. No drama, no hierarchy games, just engineers, technicians, and operators who gave a damn about their work. We disagreed sometimes. Sure, but it was honest. No whisper networks, no fake smiles. And for the first time in my career, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth every single day. I just got to do the work and let the results speak. And they did. I rebuilt measurement systems from scratch, created training modules for junior techs, wrote protocols that got adopted company-wide. When the COO came down to the floor and shook my hand in front of the whole department, I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was leading. So when my new manager called me into her office one morning and slid a thick folder across the desk, I thought it was just another special project. Then I saw the name on the cover. Vortex Engineering, Technical Recovery Contract Scope, Rebuild and Retrain CMM Measurement Protocols, Phase 1. I blinked. She grinned. They requested third-party support. We won the bid. You're heading the training team. I opened the folder. Familiar layout. My old system diagrams. Pages and pages of documentation, most of it based on templates I'd built. At the back of the packet was a proposed schedule. I'd be on site at Vortex for 2 weeks, back in the same halls, the same rooms. But this time, not as someone they could discard, as the one they now had to learn from. When I arrived that Monday morning, people looked up with wide eyes. Some averted their gaze. Others nodded awkwardly. I didn't respond with smugness or bitterness, just professionalism. In the training room, I stood in front of 24 employees, techs, leads, even mid-level managers. Most had never spoken to me before. A few probably wished they never had to. I held the printed manual in my hand, cleared my throat, and began. Precision isn't just a process, it's a promise. Let's start there. The silence in the room was respectful this time, focused, no smirks, no eye rolls. They listened. For the next hour, I walked them through system logic, fail-safes, and calibration best practices. Then we moved to the shop floor. I reintroduced them to the same machine that once defined my downfall. Now, it was my classroom. I didn't dwell on the past, but I didn't have to. Every blade measured, every instruction followed, every system restored, was its own kind of victory. By the end of the second week, they asked if I'd stay on longer as a consultant. I declined, not out of pettiness, but because I didn't need to. I had already done what I came to do. I walked out of that building a second time, head just as high. This time, though, the weight was gone. No tension, no bitterness, just quiet, earned peace. Because when they tried to silence me, I measured. And now, they finally listened. If this story spoke to something inside you, maybe a time you were overlooked, doubted, or dismissed, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below. Let me know what moment made you stand taller. And if Ember's story reminded you of someone who needs to hear this, share the video with them, like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next true story of resilience and quiet revenge. Because some victories don't come with applause, they come with proof.